I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 185er of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In the previous episode, I talked about a new book just out titled Death in the Highlands, The Siege of the Special Forces Camp at Plei Me. It was written by J. Keith Saliba, a professor of journalism up there at Jacksonville University in Jacksonville, Florida. I shared a story on this podcast about the book. That story was written by Matt Sorgel of the Florida Times-Union newspaper. It was a good story, and I highly encourage you to get a copy of Saliba's book, Death in the Highlands, over at the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com, episode 1858. There is a link where you can click on it and be reading the book in seconds if you go the Kindle route. You might want to purchase a hard copy of the book. That might take another day or so before you could start reading it. It is important that whatever route you choose, get a copy of Keith Saliba's book about the battle at Plei Me and read it. It's very important. As I always say, it is so important to know the history of things like the Vietnam War. We don't want any more monuments in Washington, D.C. made out of black marble with 58,276 names etched upon it of people who died in a war. Once is enough. We do not want to do that again, and the best way to avoid doing it again is to know as much as we can about that war so we don't step on the same mines in the future. That episode whetted my appetite to get more information about this battle at Plei Me. I am familiar with the area where it took place. I spent as little time as possible at the 4th Infantry Division base camp at Campanari, just a few miles south of Pleiku. Plei Me was just a few miles west of Campanari. Of course, I stayed out of Campanari as much as I could because I was being persecuted by some crazy higher-up officers who, much to their dismay, found out they were messing with the wrong boy. Enough said about that. I want to know more about the battle itself. Keith Saliba's book was written recently, after much time for reflection on the event. I discovered an article that appeared in the Stars and Stripes that was written a little closer to the event. Now, if you remember correctly, the battle at Plei Me took place from October the 19th through the 25th of 1965. This story was written while the memories of that battle were still hot in everybody's mind. I'm going to share that story with you so you can learn more about the battle at Plei Me. The title of this story from the Stars and Stripes that appeared back in December of 1965 is Plei Me, Fight Stands as War Turning Point. As stated previously, it looked like this battle at Plei Me was a warm-up for what was soon going to take place at the Ia Drang Valley, where Colonel Hal Moore became famous because of the book that was written about the Ia Drang Valley battle by Joe Galloway. That book was the inspiration for a movie about the battle at the Ia Drang Valley that starred none other than Mel Gibson. In this episode, I'm going to share the story that talks about it while it was fresh on everybody's mind. Whenever you go through experiences like that, you stay shook up for several weeks afterwards. The story was submitted by Wallace Beene, a writer for the Stars and Stripes, on December the 27th, 1965. Let's take a look at it. Dateline, Stars and Stripes. Plei Me Vietnam, Most people would be more inclined to fight their way out of Plei Me rather than fight to stay there. Stuck away in a remote corner of the Central Highlands, the outpost is whipped by winds that send red dust swirling through the drab buildings. During the rainy season, mud replaces the dust. I can attest to that. That's the only place I've ever been where they could have a dust storm in the middle of a rainstorm. It was crazy over there. Continuing. Around the camp is scrub brush that can and did make it possible for the enemy to move within 50 yards undetected. Their nearest neighbors are at another fortified village, Duck Cove, some 20 miles away. Remember, this story was written back in December of 1965. Continuing. It is a place where there is nothing to see, little to do, and only a very few people to do it with. At the end of the year that saw the Vietnam War grow from a guerrilla operation to a major conflict, the Battle of Plei Me stands as the turning point. Until the bloodbath that started during the dark hours of October the 19th, 1965 took place, the Communists were not convinced the U.S. forces could stand and fight in a pitched battle where the losses were certain to be heavy. It was, in effect, the first fixed battle of the war. The Communists came to discover, sadly for them, that the Americans would stand and fight. They would not run off. There's a lot of dead VC and NVA out there who can attest to that fact. Continuing. The camp itself was not the main objective of the attack, in the opinion of most officers involved. Most everyone seems to feel their main objective was to ambush the relief column, explained Captain Harold M. Moore, commander of the Special Forces Unit at the camp. By the way, you are invited to go over to the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com. Check out episode 1589, and there you will see a picture of Captain Moore in action. Continuing, Captain Moore added, I am convinced they had every intention of taking the camp too. Moore's feelings are understandable. At the age of 24, with 7 years in the Army, he took over the camp just 2 weeks before the attack. All had been quiet in the area during the previous months. Moore, of Pekin, Illinois, had only 7 enlisted men and about 250 Montagnard tribesmen to defend the triangular camp. 5 barriers of wire surrounded the low wooden buildings and the bunkers where youngsters of 10 and 12 pulled guard duty with their fathers. That's right. Those young Montagnards could kill you just as good as their parents could. The first sign of trouble came at 7 p.m. when one of our patrols was hit, Moore explained. They had to fight their way out, and most of them got back into the camp the next morning. 3 hours later, an outpost about 2,000 yards from the camp was overrun by 2 companies of Viet Cong. But they couldn't take it until the ammo ran out, Moore said. The 25 men went down fighting. At 11 p.m., the assault on the main camp started. First came the mortars and the 75-millimeter recoilless rifle fire. Most of our casualties inside the camp came within the first few minutes, Moore said. The battle raged throughout the night. 2 attempts were made to blow up the main gate, but they were knocked back. The first airstrikes roared in at 1:30 a.m., blasting targets right up to the wire as flare planes illuminated the area. Before the week-long siege ended, the planes flew 585 strikes and transformed the area around the camp into a battered no-man's land like the battlefields of World War I. I'll bet that shook up the VC and NVA. What always amazed me about the opposing forces in the Vietnam War, you could just kill them all day long and they would just keep coming. I always had to admire how the North Vietnamese could motivate their people. Continuing, firing from holes dug earlier in the night, the Viet Cong returned the machine gun fire from the planes. One Sky Raider made 3 dives on a machine gun nest and got return fire each time, Moore said. The 4th time, there was no return fire. Pardon me, but I have to take a break here and just enjoy the moment. On more than one occasion, when I was flying a Cobra gunship with the 101st Airborne Division up north in I Corps, we would attack targets that would be firing back at us with those 51 cal machine guns. Those red tracers flying past the cockpit looked like red needles going by. It was so fun when you would make your second or third pass and there were no more red needle tracers flying by. That gives you a tremendous sense of accomplishment. I know just how that Sky Raider pilot felt that night when, on the fourth run, there was no return fire. Back to the story. Moore frankly admits that he had little hope of surviving the first night. Some 1,000 Viet Cong were pressing the attack and bodies were stacking up along the wire. Planes reported the surrounding hills swarming with enemy troops. When I hear things like that, it just makes me drool with anticipation. One of the greatest sights an ARA Cobra gunship pilot could see was troops in the open. Just like Christmas morning. Continuing with the story. Our men fired until the barrels on the machine guns and the bullets were tumbling out. Some of the machine guns got so hot they started runaway firing. By good fortune, the Americans escaped injury the first night, but shortly after sunup, a helicopter crashed 500 yards from the camp. Since the VC assault had come from the opposing side, Moore decided to take out a small patrol and attempt to rescue the chopper crew. With him were Sergeant Daniel Shea and Sergeant First Class Joseph Bailey, plus 10 Montagnard troops. Shea recalls, "We got out of the gate okay and turned right toward the airstrip. Just before we started to cross it, they opened up with machine guns from hidden bunkers dead ahead of us. Bailey was killed and Shea was hit in the arm before the patrol could get back into camp. We thought the VC would leave during the day, but they didn't. The fighting continued heavy on through the afternoon," Moore said. The first reinforcements came when 12 Americans and 250 Vietnamese Rangers were dropped at the camp and quickly joined the fighting. In addition, an 85-man patrol out on a 6-day swing through Viet Cong territory learned of the assault and fought their way back into the camp despite a warning to stay clear. The Armored Relief Column coming from Pleiku, 25 miles to the north, was hit by Viet Cong firing from fixed positions along the dirt roadway, but instead of pressing forward as expected, the column spun around and withdrew in the direction it came until the attack was broken off. Then they moved forward again. On the third morning after the attack, a combined force of 250 men went out of the camp to take on the VC in their own territory. An American captain was killed and another was injured, but the patrol accounted for some 35 of the enemy. The next morning, another patrol led by Special Forces advisors went out. "Our training is to do the unexpected. So instead of staying behind the barricades, we moved out," Moore explained. By this time, Moore and his men had been 4 days without sleep. One man went to sleep while firing his mortar. I went over and found him leaning against the barrel. Moore's luck also ran out during the 4th day. I was listening to President Johnson on the radio when I got hit by shrapnel. They gave me a shot of morphine, and that was all for me. That's interesting. You could sit there and listen to President Johnson speaking on the radio during a mortar attack. Fortunately for all concerned, 2 medics assigned to the camp, Staff Sergeant J.A. Geisentanner and Spec 4 N.R. Nash, who had been away at the time of the attack, made their way back on a helicopter evacuating the wounded. I was in Da Nang and ran into a friend who told me that he heard I had been killed, Geisentanner said. That was the first I knew about the attack. Today, the Plei Me area is quiet again. This was about a month after the attack. Moore and Shea have recovered from their wounds and continue to man the outpost along with Geisentanner and Walsh. Around the camp, the scars are rapidly disappearing into the underbrush. An occasional body can be found with the skull staring up into the sun, and the fields are littered with live shells and unexploded mortar rounds. Scraps of metal from the napalm bombs still hang in the outer wire. That's pretty close when pieces of napalm bombs could go into your wire. That means they landed real close to the camp. I'm sure it was necessary to burn off some of those attackers. Where the Montagnard village once stood at the entrance of the camp, now only black ashes remain. The families have all moved inside and live in bunkers along the defensive line. The small American souvenir flag that was hoisted by the men during the battle is gone. It went to the wife of Sergeant Bailey. Moore and Shea feel the camp will be attacked again one of these days. They feel the Viet Cong needs a victory there to offset the battering defeat they received the first time. Nor do Moore and his men feel their position is too strong to be taken. Any point can be taken if the enemy is willing to pay the price, he added. This was true at another dusty fortress defended by Americans, the Alamo. But Moore and his men intend to make the asking price for Plei Me too high. That is the story of the battle at Plei Me, written just days after it occurred. As you can tell, it was a tough battle. You also have to be very proud of the Americans who fought there. Not only did they defend their position during that 1-week siege, but they didn't just sit there and take it from the enemy. They went out of the gate into the enemy area and attacked them there. That's what Americans do. We don't just sit around all day and wait for people to beat us up. We go out and do our best to beat them up and make them pay the price. That's what Captain Moore and his men did at the Battle of Plei Me. Every American who hears this story should be very proud of our military, and we should always back them up because they're going to be out there on the front lines protecting this country. Even though Plei Me Vietnam is a long way from home, it's something that had to be done. We were in the fight to the death against communism, and sometimes you have to do things like that. Fight a battle in a remote place like Plei Me Vietnam, not too far from Pleiku. I am hereby issuing Captain Moore and his men at Pleiku, who fought that battle in October of 1965, an official Vietnam Veteran News podcast salute. Thank you very much for your service to our country, gentlemen. We wish you the best if you're still around. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1859er of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these stories. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more. Coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?